Hello and welcome to episode 46 of the Freo Big Footy podcast. This week we'll go back and have a look at the qualifying final result versus Sydney, where Fremantle unfortunately went down 13 goals 15.93 to 10 goals 9.69, and then we'll have a look at the big upcoming clash against the Port Power. Unfortunately this week Seppo is not able to join us. He's been a little bit under the weather, so a bit crook, but he'll hopefully be back next week. But we have two other guests joining us, and our first is all the way from LA and overseas expert. And Gil, how are you, mate? Thanks for joining us.
Doing well, a little bit better than Hayden this week, but hoping for the best.
Absolutely, and also joining us is one of our regulars in Valkorum. Thanks for joining us again, mate.
Not a problem, as always.
All right, excellent. Obviously, Fremantle last week ended up going down in the end by 24 points, and while they sort of managed to get it back to 2 goals in the last quarter, unfortunately, they just weren't able to sustain it. Gil, what did you think of the game, mate? Obviously, you would have watched it over there.
Absolutely. I think the real key thing had to be that third quarter, and for them to come out within less than a minute and a chance to go straight back into the lead when Hayden had that set shot and missed that, unfortunately. You really wonder what a momentum changer that would have been to come out straight from halftime and to immediately take the lead. I think would have sent just a really strong message, and it just wasn't to be.
No, it was unfortunate, probably that, and as you said, the Taberner one where he's dropped the goal mark right in the goal square and then they've gone down and kicked the goal at the other end was probably also a bit of a dagger for the boys. But what did you think, Valkorum?
Yeah, those two moments definitely, I mean, you can, but you can't sort of take it down to those single moments. But, I mean, for us to only kick, 1 goal, 3 in that third to their 4 goals. It was just the deciding of the man. We were always sort of, they could go, we could go, they could go, we could go all the way through. And then that third quarter, they just got that break on us. And then we're again the same thing, goal for the rest of the match. And it was just we couldn't peg that one back.
Yeah. Obviously there was a bit of talk, obviously on the forums this week about a couple of players' performance. And obviously it seemed that Hill struggled again a little bit with the hard tag. He sort of copped it the last couple of weeks with Kane Corns and obviously again last week. Which was, so it's just one of those things he's going to have to work through. And unfortunately, Daniel Pearce was a bit sick before the game and obviously wasn't able to have an impact in the game and obviously got subbed out. So really we didn't get any drive from our two main outside runners, which made it very difficult for us.
Definitely. I think it would have been a hard matchup anyway for Daniel Pearce on Louis Jetta, and learning later that he got sick on the plane, that definitely did not help the cause. And I agree with you guys too. The drop mark by Taberner in the goal square was just really huge. And the one thing is that about Sydney is that they're such a strong team. They're one of those teams that you just can't afford to make mistakes against them, and that they're going to take advantage and capitalize on every mistake that you make. And you got to bring your A+ game to be able to hang with them.
What do you think, Valkorum? Any other sort of players stand out for you or performances on the night or on the day?
Obviously, big captain Pavlich up with 4 goals for the night was solid performer. Mazungu I thought played really well, but it didn't really come down to. I mean, Daniel Pearce obviously didn't play well, and that was recognised. But to go over there with the whole Virgin Gate. Whether they say there are no excuses, but to go over there, they're clearly the best side of the year. I think just sum it up, we were just beaten by a better team on the day.
Yeah, I don't think
there's any excuses, or it was just they were better on the day.
Yeah, and I think some of their probably not, and you wouldn't call them lesser lights, but I think most of the time when you get to finals footy, it doesn't matter which level of footy you're at. It's not the stars or your top players that will determine your whether you win or lose. It's the bottom 6 players in your list. The top 15 usually take care of themselves. You might win a battle, you might lose a battle, but I really think it comes down to the bottom 5, 6 or 7 players on there. And I thought some of their players played probably better. As you said, they just played better than we did. And, guys, and then you had other guys stand out like Luke Parker, McGlynn came in, and, they just had a better spread of players across the day.
Hanbury was solid. Nick Smith was good down back.
Rampy did his job. And you said they just managed to have more winners on the day than we did, unfortunately. And we those chances, as you said, we didn't capitalise on them well enough. And I think this week, I certainly don't think Port go anywhere near as deep as what Sydney do. When you look at the Sydney side, there really is not a lot of weak spots in there at all when you look through their whole 22.
I've got a question for you guys. Were you guys surprised that Crowley didn't go on a hard tag to either Hanbury or Kieran Jack, and he sort of was on Hanbury but then rolled off to deal with some of the other midfielders? And I'm wondering too if they thought about having Ryan Crowley tag Parker, and it was just interesting that way because it didn't seem to work what they were trying with him.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that you said normally you'd think they would go with Jack, and then obviously Luke Parker was very, very good early and was just sort of dominating in the clearances. And I think probably Ross spoke about it on Monday that in that first half we just didn't. They just seemed harder at the ball, and I must admit, I know that quite often they'll talk about the Fremantle defence and the ferocity, but I don't remember a game where I saw as many smothers as Sydney performed on our blokes. Every quarter it seemed like there was at least 10 smothers that they were getting on us, and we just were, just taking that little bit extra time to try and keep the ball down, and they were just all over us, and we just didn't adapt as well as they did.
I think they equalled the record for smothers in the game, wasn't it? I think I remember hearing one of the other footy shows during the week. I think it was 21 smothers for the game.
Oh, okay.
That number rings out. Was it 21 or 17? It was a huge number of smothers.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me if it was that many. I haven't sort of seen a lot before that, but it wouldn't surprise me at all because they did seem to make a lot of them. And as you said, their spread is just of players was very good, and I think probably a couple of standout performances. Obviously, on the night, I thought Silvani came in and did a very, very good job on Buddy. I know that Buddy ended up sort of breaking the game open a bit in the end of the.
But that was only a couple of minute period. I mean, Silvani had the best of him for the rest of the game.
Oh, absolutely! As I said, you couldn't fault anything that Silvani did, and probably a couple of those guys he actually ended up going off Buddy and sort of helping out another teammate. So I thought actually probably most of our back six were pretty good on the day. As you said, we just didn't get enough drive out of that midfield really, and hopefully we'll see those runners sort of perform a little bit better this week.
And how impressive was Ibbotson? I mean, showing what we missed last year in the finals without him. I mean, he is a great reader of the ball and all those intercept marks he came up with. And then also another thing that you guys probably noticed too, in that first quarter, I've never seen our team have that much trouble moving the ball out of the back half. It just seemed like they were pinned like almost all the way back to the goal square. I haven't seen that before this year.
Yeah. You're looking at the number 1 and number 2 defensive teams in the game, so.
And I think that's where obviously you lose, and you are right in that as well, Valkorum, but I think that's where you lose sometimes a bit of Johnson. Like Johnson has that a little bit of creativity and he can sort of see things that others can't. And I think that's where sort of like, as you said, as much as Jono's good with his intercept marking and stuff, I think it's his creativity bringing the ball out. Now, granted, this year he hasn't been as good probably in the last month of the season as he has been, certainly compared to last year, but you do miss him in that regard. And it's interesting, as you said, Gil, even about Ibbotson, at the end of the day, he took 5 marks for the match, but it just seemed like he had a much bigger impact than those 5 marks, and his ability to play that loose man in front was really strong. Sometimes Ibbotson does drive me nuts, and it looks like he's sort of playing at waffle level in terms of his intensity and does some stupid handballs and just seems to fumble at the wrong time, but then he'll go out and do 10 things that sort of, are really strong and, makes him look like he should be out there. Any other points you want to bring up, guys, on this game before we sort of move on to the next one?
No, it's interesting too. One thing I was thinking about too is, as I agree with what you guys are saying about Silvani and the job that he did on Buddy, and I think it just becomes imperative for any side playing against Sydney to get the jump early, because Buddy really seems to sort of come along as the game progresses. And late in the game, he, as you said, Valkorum, about it was only a short span that he really broke the game open, and that's really all he needed. And when he's kicking freakish goals from long distance out on the arc or up against the boundary line, I think the thing is just to get way ahead of Sydney before that stuff has a really serious impact. And that's something that Buddy seems to be able to turn that on and off, and especially in recent weeks.
Yeah, the other interesting thing was we probably just didn't get enough ball down there. If you look at our stats, none of our forwards really, with the exception of Pav, who obviously was a little bit stronger and came up the ground a bit, but none of our other forwards really got over 12 possessions for the game. And most of them, like with Crozier's an exception because obviously he was the sub, but Ballantyne only had 7, Taberner had 5, Main had 11, Walters had 12. We probably just didn't get enough of the ball down there.
But that's probably systemic from the fact that the midfield didn't get enough delivery in there to help them.
Yeah, and
as Ross was saying after the game.
Yeah, and it probably would have been. I mean, a couple of times we did manage to isolate Fife down there on Parker, but we just didn't seem to be able to do it often enough. So that was probably a bit, where we did have that matchup and where we could have exposed Parker a bit more. We just weren't able to do that. But hopefully this week we'll see as I said, I'm sure the boys will bounce back, and as I said, they'll probably be expecting a few stronger performances, particularly from the guys like Daniel Pearce will hopefully be back to full fitness, and probably Zach Clark will need to, probably just be a little bit stronger at the contest as well. All right, for the lineups this week, obviously not too many changes with the both teams this week, with only really one change between the two sides, with Nick Subin coming in to the side and Hayden Ballantyne going out with the jaw injury. I thought he might have been able to get up for this one, but obviously it must be a bit more serious than the one earlier in the year. And Port Adelaide going with no change at all. And the milestone this week is Walters playing his 50th game. Certainly still feels like he's played a lot more than that, but
it's because he's been around for quite a number of years without actually playing a game.
Yeah, it has. So hopefully he'll come in that way. I mean, before we sort of get into it, obviously the most obvious sort of thing would think that Subin will be the sub for Freo. Do you think, boys? Or do you think Crozier will get the best again?
You'd think it'd be Subin
being the sub. Yeah.
Sorry, Gil, you want to go again? Sorry.
Yeah, I think it would probably be Subin who would be a sub, because I think you're going to have to replicate some of what Ballantyne brings, and I think for that you have to go to Crozier on that one. And I was a little surprised to see that Max Duffy didn't get a little bit more consideration, considering the game that he played against Geelong and the spark that he provided as the sub right there. But then you go with Subin, who's tough and he's got the experience. And the one thing that's the big concern is that Ballantyne is such an integral part of the team, and you look at the stats and know that in games in which he kicks 3 or more goals, Fremantle are 29-1. And looking at the massive impact he had starting from the second half against Port last time they played, you really are kind of daunted by that. And then the other thing too is, the jaw is a serious injury, but you have to wonder too, is it a combination of it being just serious enough where the club is optimistic of getting past Port and saving him for a potential preliminary final against Hawthorn?
Yeah. Well, before I speak, Valkorum, what do you think, mate? In terms of the sub?
It would be Subin or Crozier who are the sub. They're the obvious choice. I don't know. Crozier brings a bit more inverted commas that you can't see X factor in the forward line, but Subin is considerably a much harder body, harder player at the ball than Crozier. And whether that's going to be what Ross wants to go for against Port Adelaide, because when you watch the Port Adelaide game on the weekend, they were so much harder at the ball than Richmond.
Yeah,
and whether that Subin comes in to play 4 quarters for that reason.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hard to be honest. It's hard to take a lot out of. I mean, to know what to take out of that Richmond performance, because it was pretty ordinary. But and I mean, it sort of reminds us a couple of weeks ago when they were coming off a 104-point win against Richmond as well. And the thing for me, I think that, as you said, Valkorum, is the fact that when you look at the Port lineup, there are actually quite a lot of tall blokes in there. Jonas is quite tall, Humph, Broadbent, Trengrove and Carlisle. So I think if we go in with only one small with Walters, I think that actually would play into their hands a bit more, with at least with Crozier. I know he's 186 centimetres, but he doesn't play as a tall. He plays more as a small. And I think his speed and agility and he also is quite a good lockdown player. So if he does play on someone like Pittard, I think he's got the ability to stop Pittard getting any run out of defence. And if you can get guys like Trengrove and Carlisle and Broadbent kicking out, I think it's certainly going to make it a lot more difficult for Port to get that run that they did last week against Richmond, if you can have someone like Crozier. And Crozier's actually did a pretty good lockdown job the last few weeks before Walters and Ballantyne sort of came back together, because obviously Walters wasn't in, and when Ballantyne and Crozier were just working together, Crozier actually did a pretty good job, I thought, a couple of weeks in a row on a couple of the dangerous half-backs coming out of defence for them. So it'd be interesting, and I said, and Subin will be certainly another option. But I think he might be better off the bench and sort of give you that extra bit of run and grunt in the third quarter or the last quarter if they need it. Obviously, we only played those games, or these boys, only 2 weeks ago. There is a couple of changes, obviously, and it's probably remiss of us not to mention already that Fife was the AFL MVP this week, which is fantastic for the club, and obviously the first time a Fremantle players received that award. And obviously he'll be a massive inclusion from the last time the two teams played.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. That's great to get that historic vindication, and especially when he was ineligible for the Brownlow with the suspensions. That's just got to really just be a tremendous thing, especially with Fife being only 22 years old. That's just tremendous.
Yeah. What do you think, Valkorum, of the obviously the rest of the team looks pretty similar. Obviously the only change they had was O'Shea's come in for Impey out of their side,
and you think that's just a matchup thing. They brought Impey in to play against Ballantyne, and obviously they left him as emergency. And if Ballantyne was named, I'm sure they would bring him back in for O'Shea and do that swap there. Not that he played that well against Ballantyne around 23, but he's the obvious matchup that they brought in for that. So,
well, I mean, he definitely did a good job in the first half. And do you think they'll go with O'Shea off the subs?
Off the sub, yeah, it makes sense.
Or do you think White? They might just use White and.
It depends on his draw. They might play him and find out it's not going too well, and then have to swap him out, or vice versa. I mean, that was a conversation I had with Ballantyne with a few mates during the week. As Ballantyne play, but as he start as the sub, and then come on at 3/4 time. You imagine Ballantyne gets to run hard for a whole quarter. It'd be crazy.
Yeah, I think if you're good enough to play a quarter, though, you're probably good enough to play the whole game. But it's not like he's coming off with But I think also the other thing with Ballantyne is, every week you watch him come off and he's sort of like, it looks like his back or his hips or his hamstring or his glutes, or, he's always getting sort of contorted into all these different positions. So
he only has two paces, full on or stopped.
Yeah, and when he comes off, he always looks like he's about to fall over and die. But so it's going to be interesting to see how he go. Obviously there's not a lot of differences between when the two sides played last time. I did find it interesting the amount of discussion, between the fact that they're all talking about Port Adelaide and the way they finished on the game. To be honest with you, I thought once Fremantle got 7 goals ahead, I think they put the queue in the rack a bit. They knew they had the game won and done and dusted. And
you mean put the queue in the rack and used up all our rotations?
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing as well, which is obviously quite interesting. But, even the fact they said Schultz kicked 6 goals, but 3 of those were in the last 10 minutes of the game when it was done and dusted. So, it'll certainly be interesting. And obviously they do have a very hard-running side. And obviously once they get, on their home patch, they're going to be, a completely different prospect. But over here, I think it'll be interesting to see how some of their lesser lights, and this is where I was sort of talking about before, where Sydney don't really have those bottom ones, but you're going to look at guys like Jake Need, those sort of, I think even to a degree, Pittard can sort of cough it up a bit when under pressure, and those sort of blokes. It'd be interesting to see how those sort of bottom 5 or 6 players play for them compared to, when they're in a different environment, where they're not at home and in a more hostile finals experience.
Also when we were talking about injuries before and talking about Hayden Ballantyne's jaw, we were talking about Michael Johnson being done for the year. You really have to wonder too, looking at the back 6, looking at Luke McFarlane and wondering if McFarlane really has anything more to offer in the context of the rest of the season, and you hope that the team gets through against Port. But I really have a feeling. I wonder if we've seen Luke McFarlane play his last game.
I think if Luke's right to go and he passes the fitness, he plays. I just think he, especially when we looked at the grand final last year, and we're not going to speak too much on it because we don't want to sort of jump ahead, but if you look at it, they don't have Buddy this year, so you can really run Dawson off Roughhead, and then if you could play Luke McFarlane on someone like Gunston, it just makes a hell of a difference. And not doing it, I think if he's fit enough, he would play, but that's another week away before we can get to that sort of position. But do you think, obviously, Crowley's in the past has played on Boak and done a reasonable job, so you would think that he would probably get that match up again, and likewise Kane Corns would probably go to Stephen Hill, you'd think, after the last game as well, where
it definitely seems like the preferred matchups both ways.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that's better than him going to Robbie Gray?
Yeah, Robbie Gray goes forward more, and you don't. And to be perfectly honest, I don't want Crowley playing in the forward line. You see when we play Adelaide and he goes to Dangerfield, and Dangerfield takes him to full forward. And he's not as good as it is when he's running around in the middle, whereas Boak's always going to be in and around the middle and on the ball. So, and Crowley's much better in that situation than he is having to play one out deep forward. Yeah, and I think that's the issue. If you go to Robbie Gray, he's just going to take you forward.
So I would probably look at. I mean, you can look at it one of two ways. You could either say to yourself, well, you can play Mzungu on him, and Mzungu can run with him all day, and he's got the nous to play down in defence because he's actually a really good spoiler. Or alternatively, because we didn't have 5 last time, you play 5 on him, and then you drag 5 forward, and then you make Robbie Gray accountable down that way as well. And, make it, because Robbie Gray loves to run in one direction, but if you can actually make him run the other way and put him in an area where he's not comfortable, then that would make a difference. Because having 5 in there where we didn't play him in the last time we played them in that midfield, he'll make a huge difference in terms of where the ball goes and in terms of the way they structure up, because he is a massive inclusion for us. And not only in that regard, but if you watch the game, generally we only have 2 players who can bail us out when we're in, when we talked about last week and what you were saying, Gil, when trying to bring the ball out of defence, normally we only go, option A is always going to be Sandilands, and you go to him, and at B is you isolate 5 and put 5 out there and he can sort of take a mark, and we certainly didn't have that when we played Port last time, and I think that'll make a big difference in this game as well.
And speaking of one direction, how do you think our Harry Styles lookalike Lachie Neale will go this week?
He would just rack up another 25 to 30 and no one will go near him again, as always. It's great. He's like the 4th, 5th, 6th midfielder on our side, and no one goes to him, and he just racks up inside touch after inside touch.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is that no one seems to be going to him, knowing that he's really had some standout games this year?
Well, what are you going to do? You go to him, and then you don't put the same amount of effort onto Mundy, and then Mundy kills you. You don't do the Barlow kills you. Fife, obviously, everyone goes there. Hill, everyone's been tagging him. Or Pearce. I mean, he's behind all of those guys on who you go to first.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well is I think for Lachie Neale, he's got to be a little bit more dangerous. Like normally when he's sort of in that role, he's very good around the clearances, and particularly in the forward 50, he can usually sneak a goal or 2 out of those clearances, and we really probably need him to do that again this week.
Definitely.
Because he didn't really hit the scoreboard last week, and normally when he's at his best, he will kick a couple of goals here and there. And I think if we can get him back in that sort of frame, I think it'll certainly be a better, will be a more dangerous side. But it's going to be, as you said, it's going to be a tough one. But as you said, they've got a pretty strong side as well in terms of some of their guys like Hartlett can run, Ollie Wines, and those sort of midfielders with Boak, and even Brad Ebert. So you'd have to think Ebert would probably do the lockdown role on Fife, because he was sort of playing on Monday last time, or whether they go head-to-head with Fife and Gray or someone like that. So it'll be certainly interesting to see which way Fremantle and Port Adelaide bring their midfield matchups. The other obvious one was Justin Westhoff, and he'll probably play in... I mean, it's a little bit different side than what we played last week as well, with Sydney having the 4 talls, where really Port Adelaide are more the opposite. They've only got really 2 talls in Westhoff and Schultz, and all the rest are small.
It'd be a bit different this time compared to round 23. I mean, Westhoff was on... Johnson was on Westhoff, and I don't know if any of you guys saw... I mean, I was at the game, so I don't know what the TV coverage is like, but I know if they saw any of that. But Johnson, he was hobbling. He couldn't even walk, so Justin Westhoff just got on his bike.
Yeah.
And was able to win that way. But he's not going to do that against Silvani, and obviously Dawson's going to go to Schultz again.
And there were times in that game where Johnson looked to be about at least 20 meters off in the contest. Yeah, he was really, really struggling. And it's something that I didn't really pick up very much on the radio as I was watching the TV, but listening to the radio commentary. They didn't go into it too much, but on TV you could definitely see that he was clearly in a lot of pain.
Yeah, I remember there was one clear moment for me. I mean, sitting on the wing, and the clear moment is that it took him about a minute to go from one end of the square to the other.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it was, as you said, I was at the game as well, Valkorum, and I think it was just a case where basically Johnson let Westhoff have... Any time that Westhoff basically got the ball more than 80 metres out from goal, he'd just pretty much let him say, you take it, and I'll just stand there and then.
Yeah,
But,
if you're leading outside 50, all yours.
yeah, but anytime he was in a dangerous position inside 50, he sort of did as much as he could to sort of get a fist in there. And as you said, Silvani's sort of he's not only playing for a final spot now, but he's also obviously playing for I don't know he's got the contract extension, but I mean it's his spot now to probably lose, so to speak. And as Ross says, the 22 that are in there, and obviously last week he certainly did his job, and I think he'll certainly get the job on Westhoff again this week. So it'll obviously be important as well to make sure that they don't let some of their smalls like Monfries and Gray and Wingard get their tails up early, because obviously they're a lot of confidence players, and if they do start kicking a few there early, then they can get their tails up. And obviously that's what happened last week with Richmond, and their train is pretty hard to stop if they do manage to get on the board early and have things go their way. What do you guys think of the ruck matchup? Obviously, Lobb versus Sandilands and Zach Clark. Obviously, they really don't have a second ruckman in Trengrove. It generally goes in and plays that role. So Taverner is going to be really important that he provides a target down there, and certainly Zach Clark as well when he's resting.
Definitely, I think. Oh, go ahead.
You go. I was going to say we've got the. Looking on paper, you've got to go that we've got the better ruck options there. Although Zach Clark hasn't been too great over the last few weeks, last month I suppose really, but he can be more dangerous because he can be up on the wing and move around. Whereas Trengrove, if he's not in the ruck, he's going to be playing back. So it sort of limits what he's able to do from the other end of the ground. So I think the Sandilands is obviously going to be the dominant ruckman on the ground. It's just hope we can get it down to our guys and we can get first use of it.
Valkorum, I think that's exactly right. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you can dominate the hitouts, but if you can't take advantage and hit it to advantage, then it's going to be a problem. One of the things that I've noticed too is that in a few games I've seen, it's really when Sandilands really whacks the ball in a direction where he whacks it forward, that seems to really be the most helpful thing, rather than sometimes tapping it downward. I mean, I've seen some great examples of a tap and then Mundy and Fife just coming out of there as the clear ball winner. But I did notice that sometimes when you open that space and when he really bangs it forward, sometimes that can work to the advantage too.
Yeah, you've got to be a little bit careful, especially with because I will be mindful of doing that particularly against Port, where their outside spread will probably be a little bit stronger than ours. So I don't know whether they will try and. It'll be interesting to see whether they do it occasionally or whether they do it inside 50 or anything like that, because obviously we want to try and do it. You saw last time we played them, we pretty much pushed up the ground and then tried to get that ball over the back, and that's where really the likes of Hill and Pearce are really going to be important, because Pearce had a really good game that day and managed to get a lot of sort of strong inside 50 deliveries, and we will certainly need that on the weekend if we want to expose that back six of Port, because they don't have a lot of. They're nowhere near as effective on the ground or when the ball's there, because of their sort of, they've got a lot of more sort of taller players. So if we can get the ball to ground level and let the guys like Walters and Crozier do their stuff, I think we can certainly be effective there, that's for sure.
One thing I wanted to ask you guys too, and not to completely look backward on this, but when we talk about Ballantyne and Walters and how dangerous our small forwards can be and why they were so quiet against Sydney, would you credit that to the way the ground was, or are Sydney's back six just that better than Port's? What would you guys say about that?
Bit of both.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both. Yeah, I think the ground, they certainly didn't look super comfortable making really quick change of direction, but as you said, it's no real excuse. But I think as Valkorum said, it was probably a little bit of both. I
mean, Nick Smith's a much better small defender than anything Port's got. It's not trying to have a go at Port Adelaide here, but Nick Smith, I mean, he's probably going to be All-Australian this year.
Yeah.
Right. And even Malcheski playing for as little as he did in that game, and looking at their other guys, definitely.
And Ballantyne, one of his strengths is able to change direction quickly and move quickly, and when you got in ground like that, it's very difficult to do.
Yeah, well, that's it. And I think the other, I suppose the other thing we've got to maybe touch on briefly, even though we may not, and hopefully it doesn't happen, but obviously there's been all the talk this week about Barlow being in the moon boot, and I know he was on 6PR this morning hoping he is going to play, but I mean, do you see obviously Matt DeBoer being the inclusion if for whatever reason he doesn't get up? And does that change our sub option as well?
Ooh, De Boer or Clancy come in for him? It's a tough call because Clancy's been on racking them up as well for Peel. You'd think De Boer would. He's sort of been in the side more than Clancy this year. But from all reports, Barlow, they're just doing that on precautionary and he'll be right to go.
Yeah, I think that'll probably be the case.
We should just move away from this line of talking.
Well, I do agree, but it's something that we do need to. It does need to be sort of probably looked at a little bit. Obviously, Duffield has got to have an important job down there as well. Probably you'd have to think he'd probably get Wingard. So not only in terms of that, but obviously his delivery outside 50 with him and probably Sutcliffe are our two main guys who now bring the ball outside 50. So it's going to be really important for him not only to sort of play defensively, but also give us that drive out of that half-back line as well.
Now, you mentioned somebody that scares me right there in terms of opposition who can be really dangerous. Wingard definitely scares me because we saw what he did in the first matchup, and he went through a little bit of a slump there, but he's one of those guys that brings some X factor and also seems to have that sort of buddy-esque quality that if you just give him a little spark, he can sort of change the outcome of the game and do so very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely, but that's where you've got to just sort of make sure early on in the game that they don't get any sort of confidence. And I know that Port will have a few more supporters here this week than they had in the previous one, but obviously Fremantle will certainly be making their voices heard and sort of certainly making it our own home ground. But yeah, it'll be certainly a tough game for us. Obviously, any other sort of matchups or points you want to bring up, boys, before we finish this one up?
How about NXS versus Eskimo Joe? Getting the crowd into it that Port won't have never tear us apart for them, and we'll have Eskimo Joe behind us.
I'm not a fan of Eskimo Joe. I'd rather wait till the end of the game when we're winning, missing in ACDC's TNT Fremantle.
Yeah. I like that.
Well, the other thing as well is, it's interesting. Obviously, there's been a bit of talk about Port and their sort of home ground, and the fact that whether it's true or not that they pump music through their sound system. I mean, the reality is that even I think Freo don't really need that sort of gimmick, so to speak. But also, it probably doesn't help that I don't think Patterson Stadium would be able to actually do it either. So, being the sort of piece of crap ground that it is, but it'll certainly be a different environment for those. And as I said, I think that the bottom 6 players for each side will probably determine the outcome of this match, I think. And or alternatively, one of those sort of a superstar from either side may have a game out of left field or, do something special to end up getting over the line. What are your tips on this one, Gil? What do you think the result will be, mate?
I think logic would tell you that it's going to be a very narrow win for the Dockers. I can't really see us losing a game on our home ground when this much is at stake. And especially also, I think, as Valkorum alluded to, it's going to be huge having Fife back in the side to play against Port when he missed the last time. There's no, that value, it's hard to put a price tag on. I'd also look for Michael Walters to bounce back and have a very big game. And I like the fact that Crozier is going to be in and knowing what he can do. But they're going to have to fight for it. They're really going to have to fight. Port will be charged up. Hinckley has done a great job with them as their senior coach. And I think also with the purple haze out there and behind the team, I think it's going to be the thing that's going to lift.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about you, Valkorum? What was your final tip, mate, in terms of the margin? What do you think? You there, Gil?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about Valkorum for a second.
No, okay. I was just sort of getting your final tip.
I really kind of think as far as the result goes, I would pick Fremantle by 10 here. I would think that although things could change, if there's a really explosive third quarter as there was in the last matchup, and if the boys don't put the cue in the rack, as you guys said, then it could be even stronger. But I would have to think if they get way ahead again and they'd be looking at a preliminary final against Hawthorn, I could see us definitely putting the cue in the rack and really saving energy for the next time. So I'm going to say Freo by 10 points.
All right, and how about you, Valkorum? What's your tip and outlook on the game?
I think it's going to sort of play out very similar to the last 2 games that we've played against them this year, where we sort of not the right wording, but we would control the pace of the game and just keep that steady margin and stay in front. Hopefully, it's exactly the same way that Sydney just did to us, and that they just can't peg us back. And I reckon it's 1.5 to 2 goals, and Gil's already stolen 10, so I'll go with 9 points.
All right, and I tend to agree. I think Fremantle, the experience they had in the grand final last year, the fact that they certainly won't want to bow out in straight sets. I think that in that regard, I think Fremantle's bottom 6 guys, I think, will be a little bit stronger on the day. I'm just not 100% convinced about some of their other, younger, particularly some of their younger players in the sort of finals experience. And as I said, it's hard to sort of judge based on last week. I know they were really strong, and they were, you couldn't ask for much more from them. They did everything they needed to, but as I said, I think it'll be sort of a different kettle of fish this week, and I think Fremantle will end up winning, and I think it'll be 16 points in the end from 9. So we'll just, but as I said, it'll certainly be a tough game, and I think it'll, I don't think it'll be decided probably until halfway through the last quarter. I think it'll be pretty close, particularly early on, and I think it'll be sort of a little bit of toing and froing, and then I think hopefully that some of our guys will stand up, and I think our midfield in particular will be stung after last week, and particularly Ross Lyon calling them out during the week. I think that I think they'll come out fired up and ready to dominate, and we'll see what happens. Obviously, also just mentioning quickly, obviously the umpires for this week, and we've got our old mate Dean Margetts back.
Dun, dun, dun.
And then we've also got Matt Stevich and Justin Schmidt. So let's hope that that basically the sides determine it, and there's not determined on any cheap free kicks and etc. And like we saw sometimes last week with even those sort of like the trip where he sort of tackled him around the thigh and stuff like that. So let's just hope it's both sides can go out and play, and we never know, we might even get a free kick inside 50 one of these days. So
well, you know what? It's interesting. First of all, I'm glad there's no Sam Fisher. And then second, there was a stat that was talked about on TV where we do somehow get more free kicks at home than on the road. And I guess the thing is, if we are able to get through Port, my real big concern would be the umpiring that we would possibly get in a rematch with Hawthorn in the preliminary final. I would be really concerned about that.
Yeah, I mean, mind you, it's not too hard sometimes, I don't think, Gil, to when you have a look at the results in some of our games. I think we had 12 free kicks last week. I think we had about 8 free kicks, or it might have been that many against the Western Bulldogs that day. So
right,
when you're averaging less than 10 free kicks a game when you're away on the road, I don't think it would be too hard to sort of average a few more at home than that. So I think I think the Western Bulldogs, we have 4 free kicks for the game.
That's right, I remember that.
So it's not hard when we in those sort of games. So, but as I said, let's just hope that it's sort of determined by the best team winning on the day. And as I said, I feel comfortable Fremantle will do that. All right, thanks again for joining us all the way from the US, Gil, and let's hope that we can hear your cheering loud and clear from all the way from the LA. And no doubt you'll be on the 6PR blower after the game, one way or the other.
Definitely. Thank you guys for having me on. And yeah, indeed, I plan to walk down to the beach a couple of blocks away and yell all the way across the ocean.
Excellent. And thanks again for joining us, Valkorum. It's always great to have you on board.
Not a problem.
All right, and that's it for this week, guys. And hopefully, as I said, Seppo will be joining us back next week and back in the land of the living and feeling a bit better. But that's it for this week. Let's hope Freo get on back on the winners' bandwagon and we get to another prelim against Hawthorn. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week. Bye for now.